Part 1. The air on Viridia was thin and smelled of ozone and old stone. The sky hung low, a pale violet that never changed no matter the hour. Around the central plaza, beings from dozens of worlds stood in silence, their forms strange and varied, some tall and spindly with eyes like polished obsidian, others armored in chitin or wrapped in flowing energy fields. They had come to watch, not to speak, not to interfere, only to witness what the Galactic Council had decreed. In the center of the plaza stood a human. His name was Daniel Porter. He was 39 years old, born in Ohio, raised on stories of starships and second chances. He had spent the last 10 years as Earth's senior envoy to the outer systems, learning alien tongues, memorizing protocols, and always trying to prove that humanity was more than just another young species clawing its way into the stars. He wore a simple gray suit, no armor, no weapon. His hands were empty. His face was calm, though his heart hammered like a drum in his chest. Before him, seated on a crescent of obsidian thrones, were the council delegates. At the center sat High Arbiter Kalen of the Virelians, a species tall and silver-skinned, with voices like wind through glass. Kalen's eyes glowed faintly as he addressed the assembly. His words translated instantly into every known language by hovering drones. "Daniel Porter of Earth," Kalen intoned, "you stand accused of violating the Treaty of Silent Stars. Your species has constructed warp-capable autonomous vessels without council approval. These drones have entered restricted zones near the Mylorian breeding nebulae. This is not exploration. This is provocation." Daniel took a slow breath. "With respect, Arbiter," he said, his voice steady despite the dryness in his throat. "Those drones were scientific. They carried no weapons. Their purpose was to study cosmic radiation patterns. We filed a preliminary notice with the Outer Systems Bureau 6 months ago. If it was lost or ignored, that is not our fault." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some species shifted uncomfortably. Others remained still as statues. The Mylorians, gelatinous and translucent, pulsed with soft light, uncertain. But Kalen did not blink. "Your filing was incomplete," he said. "You omitted propulsion schematics. You concealed your true range capabilities. This is deception, and deception from a non-member species is treason against galactic order." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had heard this before. To the Council, humanity was still a child, loud, impulsive, and untrustworthy. They had denied Earth full membership for 20 years, citing cultural instability and unpredictable aggression. Yet every time humans offered data, aid, or peace, they were met with suspicion. Now, over a paperwork error and a few harmless drones, they wanted to make an example. "Arbiter," Daniel said, raising his voice slightly, "if this is about trust, then let us rebuild it. Let us submit to full inspection. Let our scientists work alongside yours. Burning me will not make the galaxy safer. It will only make enemies where none existed." For a moment, Kalen was silent. Then he turned to the other delegates. A series of clicks, hums, and light pulses passed between them, a private consensus. When Kalen turned back, his expression had hardened. "The sentence has been agreed upon," he announced. "By ancient right and current law, the offender shall undergo cleansing by flame. Let the fire purify the lie." A gasp rose from the few human observers in the crowd, 2 junior aides and a journalist, all pale with horror. They knew what this meant. The cleansing by flame was not execution by energy beam or poison. It was ritual burning, alive, publicly, as a warning. Guards, tall insectoid enforcers with black carapaces, stepped forward. They did not touch Daniel. They did not need to. Around the plaza, circular vents opened in the stone floor. Blue flames erupted, not from fuel, but from contained plasma cores. The heat hit Daniel like a wall. Sweat beaded on his forehead instantly. His suit began to smolder at the edges. He did not run. He did not beg. Instead, he reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small comm unit, standard issue for diplomats. He activated it with a thumb press. Every human network, Earth, Luna, Mars, the Belt colonies, would receive this feed. He looked straight into the lens, his eyes burning with something deeper than fear. "Tell them," he said, his voice cracking but clear. "We remember." The flames rose higher, curling around his legs, then his chest. His suit blackened. Smoke rose. The crowd watched, some turning away, others staring with cold fascination. The journalist wept silently. The aide stood frozen, fists clenched. On Earth, billions saw it live. In schools, factories, homes, and military bases, people stopped what they were doing. A man in Houston dropped his coffee. A woman in Nairobi covered her mouth. A teenager in Jakarta stared at his screen, tears streaming down his face. No one spoke. No one moved. They watched as Daniel Porter, their representative, their fellow human, burned. The flames did not consume him quickly. The ritual was designed to last. 7 minutes, the ancient text said, for the soul to confess its sins. But Daniel did not scream. He stood as long as he could, then fell to his knees, still facing the camera, still trying to speak. The last thing transmitted was a whisper, almost lost in static. Remember. Then the feed cut out. Back on Viridia, the fires died. Only ash remained in a perfect circle. The council delegates rose and departed without a word. The plaza emptied within minutes. The wind carried the ashes across the stone, scattering them into the violet sky. But across the human world, something else was happening. In command centers, shipyards, and research labs, lights flickered on. Doors locked. Screens lit up with emergency codes. Orders were typed, verified, and sent. Not with rage, but with cold, quiet certainty. Because Daniel Porter had not died for nothing. He had died for a message. And humanity had heard it, they remembered. Part 2. The feed ended with static, but the silence it left behind was louder than any explosion. In the underground Situation Room beneath the White House, President Linda Carter sat perfectly still. Her hands rested on the table, palms down, fingers straight. Around her, the air hummed with suppressed panic. Generals shifted in their chairs. Advisors whispered into headsets. A junior aide stood frozen near the door, eyes red from crying. No one dared speak first. Linda had known Daniel Porter since he was a young attaché in Geneva. She remembered his laugh, his stubborn belief that talking could solve anything. Now he was gone, turned to ash by beings who called themselves civilized. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, no more, no less, and when she opened them, her voice was quiet but sharp as steel. Activate protocol Iron Resolve. The words hung in the air like a detonation. One of the generals, a man named Frank Dawson with silver at his temples and scars on his knuckles, nodded once and tapped his wristcom. Within minutes, encrypted signals shot out across the solar system. On Mars, the Olympus shipyards lit up like a second sun. In the asteroid belt, mining rigs powered down their drills and powered up defense grids. Lunar factories stopped making solar panels and started casting missile casings. Earth's entire industrial machine turned on a single thought: war. But this was not blind rage. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades. After first contact, Earth's leaders had studied every alien species, every treaty, every skirmish. They knew the galaxy did not reward kindness, it rewarded strength. So while diplomats smiled and traded data, engineers built weapons in secret. Scientists developed stealth drives that bent light instead of warping space. Programmers trained AI to predict enemy tactics using centuries of human warfare as a model. All of it had been waiting, hidden behind civilian projects and peaceful rhetoric. Now it all came alive. In a hangar on Ceres, a young engineer named Nora Bennett wiped grease from her hands and stared at the screen showing Daniel's last moments. She had worked on the very drones the Council claimed were weapons. Tiny, harmless things meant to map dark matter. Her chest ached with guilt and fury. Without a word, she walked to the central console and typed a command. Across the hangar, 50 dormant cargo haulers shuddered to life. Their cargo bays opened, revealing racks of railgun slugs and drone launchers. Nora had designed the conversion kits herself just in case. She never thought she'd use them so soon. On Earth, recruitment centers overflowed. Men and women lined up for hours, not for glory, but for justice. A farm boy from Iowa named Kyle Martinez signed up before his shift at the hydroponics plant even ended. He had watched Daniel burn while eating lunch. Now he stood in line with his duffel bag, jaw set, eyes dry. He didn't know how to fire a plasma rifle, but he would learn. Everyone would. Back in Washington, Linda met with her war council late into the night. Some urged caution. "We don't know their full strength," said one advisor. "We could provoke total annihilation." Linda looked at him, her expression unreadable. "They already chose annihilation," she said. "They just didn't realize it would be theirs." Frank Dawson laid out the first strike plan on the holotable. It was bold, almost reckless. Hit the Varelians where they felt safest, their frontier hub at Xylos Prime. Not to conquer, but to shock. To show the galaxy that humanity did not cower. The fleet would jump in, destroy key assets, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. Speed, precision, and terror, those were the tools now. Meanwhile, across the colonies, schools turned into training grounds. Children practiced emergency drills not for meteor strikes but for orbital bombardments. Factories ran 24 hours a day, staffed by volunteers who slept in shifts on cots between machines. Food rations were cut, luxury goods banned, all resources funneled into the war effort. Yet there were no protests, no riots. People worked in grim silence, their grief turned into fuel. In a small apartment in New Shanghai, a retired linguist named Helen Wu rewrote alien communication protocols from memory. She had once taught Daniel Porter Varelian honorifics. Now she used that knowledge to craft fake transmissions meant to sow confusion among enemy fleets. Her hands shook, but her code was flawless. On Luna, shipwrights welded armor plates onto civilian freighters. They called them ghost ships, unmarked, untraceable, deadly. Pilots trained in simulators that recreated Varelian tactics based on stolen data. None of them had seen real combat, but they trained like they had done it 1,000 times, because soon they would. Linda visited the memorial wall being built in Arlington. It was still empty except for one name freshly etched in black stone: Daniel Porter. She placed a single white rose beneath it and stood there for a long time. A reporter asked her what she would say to the families of those who would die in the coming war. She looked at the camera and said only, "We will make sure they did not die for nothing." Back in orbit, the first wave of warships powered up their drives. The UNS Resolute, newly commissioned and bristling with weapons, led the formation. Its crew moved with quiet purpose. No cheers, no speeches. Just the hum of engines and the click of safety locks being disengaged. Nora Bennett boarded a transport to Mars, her toolkit slung over her shoulder. Kyle Martinez shipped out to the belt for basic training. Frank Dawson reviewed final targeting coordinates one last time. And Linda Carter returned to the Situation Room where new reports poured in every minute. Ship completions, troop readiness, AI simulations. The galaxy thought humanity was soft. They thought Earth would beg, negotiate, or collapse under pressure. They were wrong. What burned on Viridia was not just a man. It was the last thread of patience. Now only resolve remained, and it was spreading fast. Marthriki, the jump into Xylos Prime, was silent. One moment, the human fleet was drifting in the cold dark beyond the Kuiper Belt. The next, 200 ships tore through folded space and emerged in perfect formation above the Varelian frontier hub. No warning, no declaration, just sudden, brutal presence. Admiral Frank Dawson stood on the bridge of the UNS Resolute, his eyes locked on the main display. Below them, Xylos Prime glittered, a ringed gas giant with 3 orbital stations, a shipyard, and a communications array that linked the entire Varelian outer defense net. The Varelians had left only a skeleton force: 2 aging cruisers, a handful of patrol drones, and a garrison of barely 500 troops. They had assumed no one would dare strike so deep into their territory. They were wrong. "Commence Operation Ember," Frank said. The order rippled through the fleet. First came the EMP burst. Not from weapons, but from modified cargo drones launched silently ahead of the fleet. They detonated in a wide sphere, flooding the system with electromagnetic pulses tuned to Varelian shielding frequencies. On the orbital stations, lights flickered and died. Shield generators sputtered out. Alarms blared in empty corridors. Before the Varelians could reboot, the human warships opened fire. Kinetic rods, accelerated to near-light speed, slammed into the nearest station. There was no explosion, just a clean, devastating puncture. The rod punched through decks, reactors, and crew quarters before exiting the other side, leaving a trail of vacuum and ruin. Seconds later, secondary charges inside the station detonated, tearing it apart from within. Debris spiraled into the gas giant's gravity well, burning up like falling stars. The second station tried to flee. Its engines flared, but human destroyers cut it off with precision burns. Railgun slugs shredded its thrusters. Then came the drones, swarms of them, small and fast, programmed to seek heat signatures and weak points. They latched onto hull seams, airlocks, and sensor arrays, then detonated in synchronized bursts. The station cracked open like an egg. On the surface of Xylos Prime's only moon, the Varelian garrison scrambled. Troops rushed to defense turrets, but their comms were dead. Their satellites were dark. They saw the fleet above, but they did not understand what was happening. Then the drop pods came, They fell like black rain, hundreds of them launched from human freighters retrofitted as assault carriers. Each pod carried a mix of combat drones and automated turrets. No human soldiers landed, not yet. This was not about occupation. This was about message. The drones hit the ground and unfolded instantly. Some rolled on treads, others hovered on repulsors. Their targeting systems locked onto anything that moved, anything that emitted Varelian biosignatures. Within minutes, command centers were silenced. Power relays melted. Vehicle depots became infernos. The garrison, trained for border skirmishes and pirate raids, had no answer for this kind of war. It was fast, faceless, and final. Aboard the Resolute, Frank watched the feeds from the drones. He felt no joy, only grim satisfaction. This was not revenge. This was arithmetic. One human life burned for show. Now an entire hub erased for consequence. Back on Earth, people gathered around public screens in cities and towns. They saw the footage, clean edited but unmistakable. Orbital stations crumbling. Enemy ships disabled. No human casualties reported. A quiet pride spread through the crowds. Not celebration, not yet, but a sense that humanity was no longer prey. In the belt, Kyle Martinez watched the broadcast from his barracks. He had just finished basic training. His hands still shook when he held a rifle, but now he saw what they were fighting for. Not just Daniel Porter, but the idea that humans could stand tall among stars without begging for permission. On Mars, Nora Bennett monitored the drone swarm from a command bunker. She had written the core algorithms that let them adapt mid-mission. When a Varelian jammer tried to disrupt their signals, the drones switched to light-based coordination, flashing coded pulses between units. It worked better than she'd hoped. She allowed herself one small smile, then got back to work. The last Varelian cruiser tried to jump out. Its warp core flared, but human interceptors had already seeded the area with gravity mines, tiny devices that bent local space-time just enough to destabilize a jump. The cruiser's drive overloaded. The ship tore itself apart before it could vanish. By dawn on Xylos Prime's moon, it was over. The hub was silent. The Varelian governor, trapped in an underground bunker with failing life support, sent a surrender signal on an open channel. Frank received it on the Resolute's bridge. He read the message twice, then replied with 3 words. This is not peace. This is payment. He did not accept the surrender. He did not offer terms. He simply ordered the fleet to withdraw. As they jumped back into the void, they left behind a system in ruins and a message carved into the main comm array by drone lasers. Remember Viridia. The Varelians would rebuild, of course. But they would never forget, and neither would the rest of the galaxy. News of the strike spread faster than any ship could fly. On neutral worlds, traders whispered in hushed tones. In council chambers, species that had voted for Daniel's execution now questioned their leaders. The Xanthari recalled their patrols. The Mylorians demanded an emergency session. Even the Varelians' closest allies began to distance themselves. No one wanted to be next. Humanity had not just attacked a military target. They had shattered an illusion. The illusion that the Council was untouchable, that old species ruled by right, that new ones must kneel. Frank stood alone on the observation deck as the fleet returned to dark space. He thought of Daniel burning in silence. He thought of the young recruits training in the belt, the engineers working without sleep, the president who had chosen war over shame. He knew this was only the beginning. The Varelians would not let this stand. They would gather their allies. They would come with everything they had, but humanity was ready. Not because they wanted war, but because they refused to be erased without a fight. And out there in the endless dark, the human fleet waited. Not hiding, not running. Just watching, ready. Or the victory at Xylos Prime did not bring peace. It brought fear, and fear made the galaxy move in strange ways. The Varelians, humiliated and burning with rage, called an emergency summit of the Galactic Council. They demanded every member species pledge ships, weapons, and soldiers to crush humanity once and for all. High Arbiter Kalen himself stood before the assembled delegates, his silver skin pulsing with anger, and declared that Earth was a cancer that must be cut out before it spread. But the response was not what he expected. The Xanthari, a proud insectoid race with 6 limbs and compound eyes, refused to send their fleet. Their elder matriarch clicked her mandibles and said simply, "We do not burn messengers." The Mylorians, gelatinous and slow to speak, floated in silence for a full hour before replying that they had reviewed the drone data from Earth and found no evidence of weapons, only sensors. Even the Korthans, longtime rivals of humanity, hesitated. They had seen how fast the human fleet struck, how clean their tactics were. They did not want to be next. Still, the Varelians were not alone. 3 smaller species, those who owed them debts or feared their power, agreed to join the coalition. Together they began gathering ships near the Helios Rift, a treacherous region of warped space where navigation was difficult and ambushes were common. They called it the Purification Armada. Their plan was simple: lure the human fleet into the rift, trap them between gravity wells, and destroy them with overwhelming force. What they did not know was that Earth already knew. Deep in a secure bunker beneath the ice of Europa, analyst Chris Ruiz studied intercepted comms, energy signatures, and fleet movements. He was young, barely 30, with messy hair and a habit of chewing on pen caps, but his mind worked like a net, catching patterns others missed. He had noticed the unusual spike in Varelian supply runs to the Helios sector. He saw the coded messages routed through old relay stations, and he saw the silence from species that usually gossiped endlessly. "They're setting a trap," Chris told President Linda during a secure call, "but it's a shaky one. Half their allies are only in it because they're scared. If we hit them right, the whole thing could fall apart." Linda listened, her face unreadable. "How do we hit them right?" Chris smiled faintly. "We don't just fight their ships. We fight their trust." Over the next week, human intelligence launched Operation Fracture. Using captured Varelian encryption keys and forged command codes, they sent fake orders to the coalition fleet. One message told the Xanthari-aligned ships to hold position. They were being used as bait. Another warned the Mylorian observers that the Varelians planned to seize their breeding nebulae after the war. A third, sent to the Korthans, claimed the Varelians had already promised their territory to another ally as a reward. None of it was true. But in a coalition built on fear and suspicion, truth mattered less than belief. As the Purification Armada assembled near the Helios Rift, tension grew. Ships from different species refused to share patrol routes. Commanders argued over frequencies. The Varelian flagship, the Dawn of Purity, broadcast orders that were ignored or delayed. When a human scout ship, small, fast, and painted black, darted through the edge of the rift and vanished, panic spread. Was it a spy? A scout? A trap? Then the battle began, not with a grand charge, but with silence. The human fleet did not jump into the center of the rift. Instead, they appeared on its outer rim, targeting only the Varelian supply lines. They destroyed fuel tenders, jammed comms relays, and disabled early warning satellites. The coalition fleet, already nervous, grew more confused. Some ships powered up weapons, unsure who to shoot at. Others powered down, fearing a false alarm. Then came the real blow. A Mylorian cruiser, convinced by the forged message that the Varelians would betray them after the battle, quietly powered up its engines and left the formation. Minutes later, 2 Xanthari destroyers followed. The Korthans stayed, but they moved to the rear, refusing to take point. The Varelians were furious. Kalen demanded answers over open channel. The Mylorians responded with a single pulse of light. "We choose survival over pride." Now outnumbered and exposed, the Varelians had no choice but to engage. Their remaining ships surged forward into the rift, hoping to draw the humans into close combat where their superior shields would dominate. But Frank Dawson had studied the rift's gravity currents for weeks. He knew where the safe lanes were. He knew where the dead zones lay. As the Varelian ships entered the narrow corridor, human drones, launched hours earlier and hidden in asteroid shadows, activated. They fired micro-missiles not at hulls but at navigation arrays and sensor domes. Blinded and off course, the Varelian ships drifted into unstable gravity pockets. One cruiser spun wildly before colliding with a debris field. Another lost engine control and tumbled into a micro-black hole, vanishing without a trace. The human fleet never fired a single main gun. They watched from a distance as the coalition tore itself apart, not by human hands but by its own fear and lies. By the time the battle ended, the Purification Armada was gone. Some ships were destroyed. Others had fled. Only the Varelian core remained, battered and alone. They sent a distress call, but no one answered. Their allies had already turned their backs. Back on Earth, people did not cheer. They understood now that war was not about winning battles. It was about breaking wills. and the will of the council was broken. Chris Ruiz sat in his bunker staring at the final report. He felt no triumph, only exhaustion. He thought of Daniel Porter burning alone on Viridia. He thought of the ships lost, the lives spent. But he also thought of the message sent across the stars. Humanity would not be ruled by fear. And somewhere in the Helios Rift, the last Varelian commander powered down his weapons. Not in surrender, not yet, but in silence. Because even he knew the galaxy had changed. The old order was crumbling. And from its ashes something new would rise. Hartfimbauer. The final battle did not begin with a declaration or a warning. It began with silence. The human fleet gathered at the edge of the Viridia system, engines cold, weapons ready, waiting. They had tracked the last Varelian armada for weeks as it limped back toward the place where it all started. The Varelians were not coming to fight. They were coming to make a stand, to die with honor, as they called it. But humanity knew better. They were coming because they had nowhere else to go. Viridia looked the same as it always had. Pale violet sky, ancient stone plaza, wind that carried whispers of old judgments. But now the plaza was empty. The council amphitheater stood in ruins, its obsidian thrones cracked and scorched from earlier skirmishes. Weeds grew between the stones. The galaxy had abandoned this place, but Earth had not. They remembered. Admiral Frank Dawson stood on the bridge of the UNS Resolute, watching the Varelian ships form a defensive ring around the planet. They were fewer now, only 30 vessels, many damaged, all running on backup power. Their flagship, the Dawn of Purity, hung at the center like a wounded beast. It broadcast no threats, no demands, only static. Frank did not order an immediate attack. He waited. He let the Varelians see the human fleet. Over 300 ships now, sleek and dark, bristling with weapons they had never shown before. He let them feel the weight of what they had created. Then at dawn, by Viridia's slow clock, he gave the command. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was not like Xylos Prime. There were no drones, no tricks, no hidden traps. This was open war. Human destroyers darted through enemy lines, firing railgun slugs that punched through weakened shields. Cruisers exchanged broadsides with Varelian warships, their hulls glowing red from the heat. Fighters swarmed like angry wasps, picking off turrets and sensor arrays. The sky above Viridia turned orange with fire and debris. But the humans had one advantage the Varelians could not match: unity. Every ship moved as one mind. Every pilot, every gunner, every engineer fought not for glory, but for the man who had burned here. They fought for Daniel Porter, and that made them relentless. By midday, the Varelian ring was broken. Their destroyers lay in pieces. Their cruisers drifted powerless. Only the Dawn of Purity remained, its engines sputtering, its weapons silent. A final message came through, short, clear, and desperate. "We surrender." Frank did not reply right away. He looked at the planet below, at the circle of ash that still marked where Daniel had stood. Then he opened a channel to President Linda Carter. "It's over," he said. On Earth, Linda stood in the rebuilt Situation Room. The walls were bare except for one photo, Daniel Porter, smiling at a diplomatic gala 10 years ago. She took a breath and said, "Bring them in, but make sure they see what they did." The human fleet moved in, not with violence but with control. Boarding teams secured the Varelian ships. Engineers shut down their reactors. Prisoners were taken not as slaves but as witnesses. 2 days later, Linda arrived on Viridia aboard a civilian shuttle. She wore no uniform, only a dark coat and a silver pin shaped like Earth. She walked alone to the center of the plaza, where a new stone had been placed, a black slab with Daniel's name carved deep. She laid a single white flower on it, then turned to face the gathered crowd. Alien delegates had come from every corner of the galaxy, some out of guilt, some out of fear, others simply to see what humanity would do with victory. They expected vengeance. They expected blood. Instead, Linda spoke. "You burned one of ours to teach us fear," she said, her voice calm but carrying across the silent plaza. "We answered with fire to teach you respect. We did not seek this war, but we will not forget why we fought it. From this day forward, no species will be judged by its age, its origin, or its past, only by its actions. The old council is dead. In its place, we offer something new, a concord of sovereign worlds. Equal voices, shared laws, no exceptions." She paused, then added, Earth will be a founding member, not because we conquered you, but because we proved we belong. A murmur passed through the crowd. The Mylorians pulsed with soft blue light. The Xanthari bowed their heads. Even the Korthans, arms crossed and wary, gave a slow nod. The Varelians said nothing. Their High Arbiter Kalen was among the prisoners. His silver skin dull, his eyes empty. He had watched Linda's speech from a holding cell. For the first time he understood. Humanity had not won with weapons alone. They had won by refusing to become what the galaxy feared them to be. In the weeks that followed, the Conquered was formed. Delegates met not in grand amphitheaters but in simple halls on neutral worlds. Earth sent scientists, not soldiers. They shared data on clean energy, medical tech, and asteroid defense. They asked for nothing in return but a seat at the table. Back home, life slowly returned to normal, but not the old normal. Children learned about Daniel Porter in school, not as a victim but as a symbol of courage. Factories shifted back to building homes and ships for peace. Kyle Martinez, now a decorated pilot, returned to Iowa to visit his parents. Nora Bennett helped design the first joint human-Varelian research station near Mars. Chris Ruiz took a long vacation, finally sleeping through the night. And Frank Dawson stood once more on the observation deck of the Resolute, now docked in lunar orbit. He looked out at the stars, not as threats but as neighbors. He thought of Daniel, and for the first time he smiled, because Daniel's name was no longer written in ash. It was written in law, in treaties, in the quiet understanding that humanity would never again be silenced. The galaxy had learned to listen, and Earth had earned the right to speak.